Everyone, welcome back. Today we'll be creating a simple garden, a quick little plant garden, and it's going to be quite fun. So let's just add a circle. We'll go to mesh and we'll just add a circle. Then we want to tab into our circle and give it a face, extrude our circle, insert our circle, and then of course take it down just a little bit. Then we can insert once more and we can then extrude just like that. We can then hit Control B to bring this down a bit more to give it a better shape. We can then add a couple of loop cuts just around there. So then you're going to want to click Shift and Alt, and you want to select both of these. Let's select all of these faces, pressing Alt. Then we want to go for extrude along normals. So then we can affect the space a bit more like this. Then it becomes really cool to use. And we can even affect the space even more by pressing Control B. And then we can do almost all sorts of designs. And from here on out, it becomes really cool. Then we want to go to Shade Smooth, of course. We want to go to Normals. We want to go to this tab on the right, Object Data Property, Auto Smooth, turn that all the way up. So we're going to keep that around 43. And now what we can do to make it look even better is that we can add a bezel modifier, just like that. Now it looks super cool. So now what we can do is that we can add a plane just around there. We can scale this plane down. Click on your number pad, just click number 7 to get the top down view. Then we can scale this down using the x-axis just like that. Tab in, click 6 for edit mode, and then click Control R. You get some loop cuts. Let's add some loop cuts, ladies and gents. Click number 1 to get the points, and let's bring these down just a little bit. Let's make them look a little bit better. So there, that actually looks pretty good. Let's select all. So after we exit edit mode, we're now in object mode. We can now click Control 2. Now we've got a subdivision modifier. We can do almost anything with this subdivision modifier. We can tab back in, press 6, face select, and we can then bring this upwards. And now it's going to look a bit more like a plant, exactly how we want it to look. We're going to press Control R, add a loop cut right about there. Control B. Now we can add a few more loop cuts just like that. So now we've got about 3 loop cuts, just that simple. Press number 1 to get our points, and now we can click on auto merge vertices, and that's at the top in the right hand corner. And once we bring those vertices downwards, so now we just got to press G twice, slide it down, and that will merge in the center. There we go. It's starting to look a bit more like a plant leaf. Next we got to do edge select, and let's click on Shift to select them both and extrude to bring them down. So you can actually bring them up as well, extrude to bring them down. So now that we can tab out back into object mode, we can actually use another modifier, which is solidify modifier, and that will give us a body, will give us a thickness to the object. Now we can add as much thickness as we'd like. We don't want it to be too thick, but that's about good. Shade smooth. We don't want it to be too thick, of course. So I'd say just around 2, shade smooth, and that looks pretty well. That looks pretty good. So now that we've got our object there, we can actually do whatever we'd like. We can actually rotate our object. We can duplicate our object, Control B, right click, and then rotate on the z-axis just like that. Bring it around, and then just bring it across, bring that down using G, bring that down on the y-axis just around there. But we can rotate it a bit more actually on the z-axis once again, and of course bring it down. Let's move these up just a little bit. Now we can once again just duplicate this and rotate once again. Click G, and now we can bring that across on the x-axis, bring it down on the y-axis, bring it across on the x-axis once again. And I'm doing this from the top down view, so it would sound a little bit weird, and it would look a little bit weird. So that could be considered our first plant. We can actually duplicate all of this, move it aside, using the x-axis, move it aside. And now what we can do is actually we can duplicate this, right click, and we can shrink this down, and then we can click R and X to rotate this, and we can bring it across just like this. So because that does look a bit funny, what you can do is just press G, Z, and bring it down even more. There we go. So that's starting to look a little bit better. Now let's press Control S to save. So these are our little plants, and we're just going to put them in there in just a second. But before we can do that, we need to add a stick of some sort. So what we can do, we can press Control A, go to Mesh, and click Cube. You can create a lot of things from cube, scale that cube down using S, and then extend the cube using the Z-axis just like that. That's actually a bit too much, so extend it once again, just around there. Bring it down once again in size, and we can continue to expand this if we like, but I'd say that's about good. Now what we can do is that we can actually add a subdivision surface modifier, and this gives us this spiky little pencil. But once we tab in, we go into edit mode, we can actually add loop cuts, and then we can extend these up, add another loop cut, extend it down, and now we've got ourselves a stick of some sort. But with this loop cut, if we want it to look a little bit smoother, we can actually add the loop cut 3x3. We can tab out back into object mode and we can shade smooth. That right there is our little plant. So what we can do is that we can actually parent all of this to the stick. So if we go to parents, we can actually set the parent to object. So if I move the stick around, it goes wherever I want it to with said object. Now let's go back to face view. With all of these leaves right here, we can actually duplicate once again. We want these ones to go on top actually. So we want to bring these up using GZ, and then we want to scale it down somewhat. And we can actually rotate it just like that. And if we want, then we can actually look at it from a closer angle, and then we can actually just rotate on different axles to bring it together, sort of like that. Rotate on X axles to bring it down like that. And then similar thing with this one, we can actually rotate this one on the Y axle to bring it down. It's starting to look better. You can duplicate once again and rotate using the Z axles, bring it down, bring it across using the X axles. There we go. Using the Y axles, we can just position it a little bit better, and then we can probably just zoom it down. That's using the S, and once again using the S, we can actually just extend this in this sort of way. And then I can simply duplicate once again and rotate for the opposite side, and then just move it across. Just move it across just like that, using the different axles until it looks like something that you'll be happy with. And bring this down. I'm going to use the Y axis, I'm going to use the X axles right there. Rotate just a little bit, a bit more on the Z axles. Bring it down on the X axles and bring it across using the Y axles. Now we can actually just duplicate this stick right there. Move this stick across on the X axles right there. Now this stick is underneath. Just position it properly so they at least look like they're together somewhat. Reduce the size using the S axles. So we can reduce the size using the S axle. We can reduce the size using SZ, and obviously we can bring it up and we can just zoom it down just a little bit. We can just make it look a little bit different from the big one. Now with all of the plants, of course, we can just parent it once again to this stick, parent it to the object. There we go. So now that they're both the same size, actually what we can do, we can unparent that, and each one of these we can actually just shrink it down, like give them different sizes. Make the variation look a little bit more complicated, so not so easy that it would just look a bit too generic, you know. There we go. Let's extend this one just a bit like that. Let's keep extending. Bring this one down so it doesn't look too generic, of course. Bring it across and then bring this down on the Z axles just a little bit, and now you can see that looks quite a bit different. What we can do, just parent it once again, and now we can just zoom that down. But most importantly, we can now add this to our object. So there we go. Looking from the side views, it actually makes this super easy to add these from, and then we can just move this one as well. Looking from the side views, of course, we can bring this one across just like that. And of course, we don't want it to be affected too much, so we can just rotate it on the Y axles just like that, and perhaps just bring it down just a little bit, and we can actually just rotate this. And it's the exact same thing with this one, of course. We can actually just rotate this, perhaps using the Y axles. So there we have a few plants. So now we can just duplicate these. Both plants, they look somewhat different, so we can just duplicate until we find something that is pleasing to us. Once again, just keep on duplicating. We're making a pretty good garden so far. We can actually just rotate this, perhaps on the Z axles, duplicate once again, perhaps make this one a little bit bigger. And now, of course, with the one at the top, it's the exact same thing. But we might want to duplicate this from the side, as we want it to attach a bit more to the object. So now that we've duplicated this one, we can just rotate this one until it's a bit more pleasing. Keep on duplicating and keep on rotating. And now, of course, this is really starting to look a little bit better, really amazing. That in basic form is our little plant garden. We can actually just readjust this just a little bit. And it's the same thing with these ones. We can actually just readjust them so they fit into the plant just a little bit better. So actually this will help us to get a more organic look and feel. We can just bring this down quite a bit. And that's it. We just want to continue to get an organic feel. So I'm just adjusting this using S and Z axles. I'm using X axles. I'm using Y axles. and I'm just adjusting it until it's pleasing to me. So I would of course suggest that you do something somewhat similar, and you can really make these objects as small as you'd like them to be. You really are playing with your own rules when it comes to Blender. That's the amazing thing about Blender. Now when we go to the side view, we can actually rotate some of these as well. So we can bring the sizes down and we can just rotate them as much as possible. We can then bring them in, rotate a little bit more, bring it out a little bit more, and then just keep zooming down just a little bit. And then with these ones, we can just make them a little bit bigger, as long as they don't really go outside the boundaries. So now that we've got that, what we can actually do is that we can actually add another circle. We will make a dome, and let's bring this down into our structure. Let's go into X-ray mode and let's try to center this little dome right there that we're gonna make in our little garden. Now we can actually tab in edit mode and we can just extrude using the Z axis, and we can actually extrude as high as we'd like. So that's the really amazing thing about Blender. We can actually just tab back out temporarily, and we can actually just hide this for a moment. But there's lots of things that we can do with this. But if we unhide it, if we just click on the right hand corner, you'd see these little eyes. Just click on that, tab back in, and let's just press F to fill all of that, and then we can actually just bezel the edge if we want to, just kind of like this. We can actually create our little artificial dome. But even more incredible, these faces we can actually just select. Select these faces, and then magic that we can actually do, we can actually separate these faces if we'd like, and then we can actually have a pretty cool effect on these faces if we like. So for one, we can bring it down just a little bit, so essentially our dome will be sort of open to visitors. We can actually just duplicate this and bring it above, of course, and then from the top we can actually just zoom down. Then from the top, of course, we can actually just tab in edit mode, edge select all of this corner right there, and then we can just bring this out if we'd like. So it becomes something rather cool. So with this, we can actually just scale the edges to whatever liking we'd like, but we can use S on the edges and just bring this around, bring it up just a little bit. Now with this, we can actually just add a solidity modifier. There we go. We can actually add a subdivision modifier, make it a little bit better, and just give it a shade smooth. So what we can do is actually with all of this, we can actually just, it's all one object, so I can move it around as freely as I'd like. I can actually just shade smooth this entire object. I can click on the base model down below, click Control L. So what I just did was just copied modifiers, so everything is modified quite similarly. So now we can actually just enable auto smooth, so we can smooth it as much as we'd like. So auto smooth is on 180, so we can actually go back to modifier, add our solidity modifier. So now because it's a glass, we actually want to adjust the thickness. So if we go into X-ray mode, we can actually just adjust the thickness using our solidity modifier. And our thickness can be almost anything we want. That's the really amazing thing. But for now, I'd say perhaps around 6 or 7. So let's go with 7 actually. You know what? Let's go with 5. We don't want it to be too bulky. Let's click Control S to save our project. I suggest moving your solidity modifier on top of your bezel and look at the difference that it makes. It instantly makes a little bit of differences. So what I just did was just click both objects, entered into edit mode. That's quite essential. You want to double click A, select everything, and then of course you want to click Shift N, and that will recalculate normals. Now we would like to render our object, of course. So we want to go to render settings, we want to go to cycles, that's our favorite. The render threshold, I like to set that around 6,000, maybe even 7,000. Naturally, I need a base of operations, so let's add a plane, and let's bring this plane out as much as we can. Lower the plane just below the object. This will essentially be our background, and we can widen the plane just a little bit more. Now the amazing thing is that we will use ISO camera, and true ISO camera is actually pretty phenomenal, and that will give us a really cool view, kind of like that. We want to move our plane up just a little bit, not too much. I'd say that's perhaps okay. We can actually move this up a little bit just on top of the plane, just to make sure it looks all good. We can actually now click Z, go to material view. This will give us an idea of what we're doing. So now we can actually just create a glass material. So if we go down to our material tabs, new material, and let's call it glass. And this is actually quite similar. This is actually quite simple. We just go to surfaces and we click on glass. So from here on out, technically that's a glass, but we need to edit it so it does look transparent. So what we can do is actually, we can add an additional screen at the side. My left screen on the side will basically be this will basically be my viewport for now. We'll add a true ISO camera to my viewport right there. And actually with this ISO camera, we can actually zoom in quite a bit and we can move it up just a little bit more. With the base layer, I actually want this to be metal. We're gonna give it kind of a dark metal look. It's gonna be quite a metallic look. So we wanna put the metallic up quite high, but now the environment is all dark. So we kind of need to add some light. So Shift A, add some area lights. Those tends to be my favorites. And let's add 1000 for the first aerial light. And once again, let's click in render on my left viewport right there. And that's what it's starting to look like. So now we're starting to get an idea of what we're trying to create. So we need to make sure our plants are the correct color. So let's take a good look. Let's hide the dome for a moment. And these are all of our plants. Quite beautiful, in fact. So some of these plants will be different colors. So some of these plants, I actually want some of them to be green. And we're just gonna go and give it a green color. We don't want it to be too bright, of course. And if we zoom in, that actually gives us a more in-depth idea of what that would look like. We don't want it to be metallic, but we don't want it to be too soft. So we want to keep the roughness at a decent rate, because after all, it is a plant. So we want to keep the roughness around perhaps 700, but I'm trying to get the right amount of darkness right there. So we will work for that. We will work with that for now. The top one at the top, we perhaps want to make this one a yellow plant. So now this is what you just have to do. Just add your colors to your plant. So I'm actually just going to speed run through this part, and you can add the colors yourself, of course. So now that we've colored our plants, I've transferred these panels. This is now metallic. This is now part of the glass. We can now add our dome back into our simulator. And what we basically want to do is lower the roughness enough until we can see our object. We just want to have a play around with this. Also have a play around with the IOR as well. This does affect it quite a bit. This, of course, just to play around with it until you get something that looks the way you need it to be. But of course, I'd like to leave a little bit of blur remained in. So now what I'm doing is essentially I'm just rotating the lights just to have a different effect on my screen. So naturally, I just continue to rotate my light. And with some of the lights, I might as well just add a different color just to give it a different type of look. In fact, what we can do, we can actually just move one of these lights into the actual dome. We can actually lower the light into the dome, and this will give us a really cool effect. But because it's too bright, we can actually lower this to 500. We can perhaps lower it to 200, just so we don't have too much light, and just position it as well as I can. We can actually add additional lights at the bottom, and we can actually just rotate those lights to have different sort of effects. Now we can actually just lower the emissions of this light, the power of this light a little bit more, until we get a little bit of a glow, but not too much, of course. We can actually add more of a blue light. That tends to work very well, just like this scenario, and that's looking pretty good. Now inside, because of the color of my objects, I want to add particularly interesting lights. I don't want to give it, now that red light seems to have a really amazing effect. Now with the dome and everything, we can actually raise the dome somewhat in order for the dome basically not to have any negative effect. We can just raise it just a little bit because we want to be able to see our plant as best as possible. So save that, and essentially that is our plant. But we can move this camera up just a little bit more, adjust the orthographic scale perhaps zoom in just a little bit more, and we can just adjust it upwards a little bit more. And yeah, that tends to look really nice. We can perhaps turn up the power on our light just a little bit. We want to, of course, keep this amazing look that we've got going on. Now, if we go into wireframe mode, we should be able to see more of our light, and we can actually just adjust it a bit more like that. So now that's basically our finished product. I think that looks almost perfect. But perhaps one more thing that we want to do is perhaps an additional light. I'm sorry that I'm doing this, but this is the way we have fun with Blender, is just to continue to add additional light units until you get the effect you want. Now, particularly on these plants, I obviously want most of these plants to have a bit more of a greenery effect. So we can perhaps bring down the brightness of these lights, but you can see right there, that's actually a really cool effect. Now save that, and perhaps that's our last addition that we make. So that was it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to see more. Leave a like, leave a comment. Let's render our image now that we've already set it up, our very interesting. So that's our dome, ladies and gents. Let's just render now that we've set up our render settings. I've set my render output at about 7,000. Let's turn off the noise threshold, or at least let's put the noise threshold at even a smaller number, because I want it to look crispy. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, leave a comment, ask any question. I'd love to help if you have any questions. I do have courses on Skillshare. Feel free to check out my Skillshare courses. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.